Hey everyone, POINDEXTER here. And in this video, we continue our playthrough of Fleet Commander Nimitz with the Adversary Yamamoto expansion. US and Australian forces sank several Japanese ships and destroyed many infantry battalions the last turn. But the Japanese are far from a spent force and are still formidable. So, let's get started on the next campaign turn. Beginning the sequence of play, we move the campaign turn marker to the next space. This campaign turn takes place in the months of March and April 1942. The next step is U.S. resupply. We acquire our 21 supply points and place the supply counter values in the supply box. These are all the forces in Hawaii that we can call upon this turn. It's tempting to send all 4 aircraft carriers and surface ships into battle, but that would leave us with very few forces on the next campaign turn. We'll continue beefing up our naval forces and spend 4 points for the battleship force South Dakota, Indiana. We'll spend 4 more points and purchase the 2nd Marines, the American Infantry, and the 43rd Infantry. And we'll spend 8 points for 2 fighter groups and 2 bomber groups. This leaves us with 5 supply points. We place our newly purchased forces in the West Coast area. Before we begin scouting, we'll place moved markers in the areas where there is only 1 Japanese infantry or land-based aircraft, as the Japanese cannot move the last of these forces out of the area, with Japan and East Asia being the exceptions. We'll spend 3 supply points to purchase 3 scouts, and we'll place them all in the area where the threat is greatest, the 3 Japanese fleets in the Gilbert Islands. Carrier Fleet 2 has the fewest forces, so we'll roll Japanese orders for them first. Remember, we add +2 to the final scouting dice roll. We roll a 12, but adding 2 makes 14, a battle. The fleet must move to an area where there are both U.S. and Japanese forces. There are only 2 choices in this case, New Guinea and Borneo. But Borneo has the fewest forces, so Carrier Fleet 2 moves there. Carrier Fleet 4, with 6 forces, moves next. It's a 20, an offensive. The fleet moves to an objective with no Japanese forces ashore that is also adjacent to an area where there are Japanese forces ashore. The only objective that fulfills both requirements is the Solomon Islands, so the fleet transits to this area. Battleship Fleet 1 is the last fleet to be scouted. We roll a 6, which is modified to 8, a withdrawal order. The battleship fleet moves 1 area closer to Japan, which is the Marshall Islands. A quick clarification between the core game rules and the Yamamoto expansion. Unlike the individual ships in the core game, fleets do not automatically perform a hold order when in an objective area. This is why we can move the fleets out of the Gilbert Islands, even though it is an objective. Now, it's the movement step and the U.S. movement segment. Japanese Carrier Fleet 4 is heading to the Solomons. The fleet consists of 2 fleet carriers, a light carrier, a battleship force, destroyer force, and 1 battalion. We have 4 aircraft carriers ready to go. We'll form a task force around 3 of them: Enterprise, Hornet, and Saratoga. We'll toss in 3 cruiser forces, 2 destroyer forces, and 1 submarine. We'll also add MAG-23 and the 49th Fighter Group from the West Coast for extra air support. And we'll take the last U.S. battalion from the West Coast as well. We'll send this task force to the Solomons and meet the Japanese in the campaign's first carrier versus carrier battle. We'll form a smaller task force from the remainder of our available ships and send it to New Guinea to support our forces there and to fight off any Japanese reinforcements. We'll take a battleship, cruiser, destroyer, and a submarine and send them to the beleaguered island. We'll leave the remaining naval forces behind in Hawaii. We'll also move all the West Coast forces to Hawaii as well, in the off chance the Japanese make a move in this direction. This completes U.S. movement. Japanese orders is the next step. We begin rolling orders for the remaining Japanese forces, starting with areas that have the smallest number. The Caroline Islands has 2 infantry forces. We roll for the orders, and it's a 5, a refit order. We randomly choose one of the infantry forces and return it to Japan. We also move the resupply counter up 2 spaces. Surface Fleet 3 consists of a submarine and a transport, so we roll for this force next. It's a withdrawal order, and the fleet moves 1 area closer to Japan, which is the Caroline Islands. The Yamamoto expansion rules state that when a fleet moves to another area, we must refill the empty transports with infantry from Japan. We don't have any available infantry in Japan, so we take one of the battalions from the battalion pool. This step is only done if the fleet moves to a different area. We also move the resupply counter up 1 space. We now roll for the lone Japanese fighter in Borneo, which we should have done first, since it is the only force that can move out of this area, as the infantry must remain since there are U.S. forces present. It's another refit order, and the fighter force moves to Japan. We increase the Japanese resupply 2 spaces to 5, and we now add a +2 modifier to all future dice rolls. Surface Fleet 1, with 3 ships, including the new carrier Unyo, is next. It's a 5, modified to 7, which is a refit order. The fleet is sent back to Japan, and we replenish the fleet transports with 3 new battalions. We increase the resupply another 2 spaces. Carrier Fleet 5, which has a total of 6 forces, is next. It's a 10, but we add 2 to the roll, which makes 12, a south order. The fleet moves 1 area closer to Australia, which is the Mariana Islands. The resupply counter is not moved after this order. The forces in Okinawa are next on the orders roll, with a total of 9 forces. It's an 18, modified to 20, and another offensive takes place. We move the fleet, along with 3 infantries, to the Solomons, since it is the only objective with no Japanese forces ashore and is next to New Guinea, which does. Surface Fleet 2 already has 2 battalions, so we'll take 1 more from Okinawa, which makes 3 infantries. With this order, we shift the resupply counter back 8 spaces, removing the +2 modifier. We continue rolling for the remaining forces in Okinawa. And it's a refit order. We move 1 infantry and 3 aircraft to Japan. The infantry is the first to move, and we randomly pick one of the 2 land-based aircraft and place them in Japan. We move the supply counter up 2 spaces as well. Finally, we roll for the forces in Japan, beginning with Carrier Fleet 1, which has 5 forces. And it's yet another refit order, which returns them to Japan. But since these forces are already in Japan, we perform a hold order instead. The fleet, along with 1 infantry and 3 random aircraft, are chosen. There is no infantry to select, so we select aircraft that are to remain. Because of the hold order, we move the resupply counter up 4 spaces, and the +2 modifier is back in play. We now roll for the final Japanese fleet, which consists of 7 forces. We roll a 6, modified to 8, and it's a withdrawal. The fleet and 2 land-based aircraft are selected, but the forces are already in Japan, so we perform a hold order instead. We move the resupply counter up 4 more spaces, and now we add a +5 modifier to the next orders roll. We roll orders for the remaining Japanese fighter force in Japan. It's an 11, a support order, but we add +5 to the final die roll for a 16, which is reinforce. Of the 2 areas that apply to this order, the Gilbert Islands has the fewest Japanese forces ashore, so we move the fighter to this area. The resupply counter is not moved and remains in the current space. All Japanese orders are now complete, and we remove all the moved markers from the map. In a repeat of the previous 2 months, we have battles in Borneo, New Guinea, and the Solomons. But this time, they will be bigger and bloodier. The Japanese are launching a massive counterattack in the Solomons, with 2 fleets containing aircraft carriers. They mean to take these islands. New Guinea seems to have been left out to dry, with no Japanese reinforcements sent. And Borneo looks to be a lost cause, with only a single U.S. battalion standing in the way of a complete Japanese overrun. Now it's time to resolve battles, beginning with the lost cause in Borneo. We start by placing U.S. forces on the battle map, and the lone U.S. battalion is placed in the U.S. foxholes. Japanese forces are placed next. In this scenario, the placement of the Japanese ships follows a set of rules. The Japanese carrier is placed in the ocean area only if one of the following is true. There are Japanese infantry on transports, there are Japanese infantry ashore, and there are land-based aircraft from either side on the island. 2 of these requirements are met. There are Japanese infantry on transports and Japanese infantry ashore, so the Japanese carrier is placed in the ocean area. We now follow another set of rules regarding placement of the remaining forces. Since there is a Japanese carrier in the ocean area, it requires an escort force. The number of escorts required is equal to the number of carriers in the battle. For example, if there were 3 carriers, we would need 3 escorts. We only have 1 Japanese carrier, so only 1 escort is needed. To determine which one, we select the force with the lowest surface attack value. The submarine force has the lowest value, so we'll place it alongside the Japanese carrier. Any remaining ships are placed in the coastal area. We also place carrier aircraft next to the Hosho. The Hosho is a light carrier, so we refer to the campaign sheet for the type and number of aircraft to place. A light carrier gets 1 A6M fighter and 1 D3A dive bomber. This completes the battle map setup. Now we determine the number of battle turns. It's a 10, which is 4 battle turns. We next determine the number of Japanese battle plans to draw. The Japanese have a total of 7 forces, not counting carrier aircraft and transport ships, so we'll draw 2 battle plans per turn. Now we select our own battle plans. We'll choose artillery, which is 2 points, and envelope, which uses our last battle point. We begin combat by drawing 2 Japanese battle plans. The first is carrier attack, which is equivalent to rolling a 10 for the Japanese bomber's attack area. Since there are no U.S. ships at all in this battle, we ignore the plan. The second plan is ship combat, and this one is more effective, as it increases the attack numbers on AAA and naval gun rolls. We perform the Move Japanese Bombers step, as there are no U.S. aircraft in the battle. There is only one possible area for the bombers to move to, which is the island area, where our U.S. battalion is located. We move Japanese fighters next, but there is no valid area for them to move to, so we ignore this step and proceed to combat and the bomb runs segment. The Japanese bombers attack the U.S. battalion and scores a hit on 3, damaging the U.S. battalion. We skip the torpedoes and depth charge segments, since there are no U.S. ships present, and perform naval guns. The Japanese battleship force uses the ship combat battle plan, adding +3 to the base attack value and a superior value of 2. The force will score a hit on a roll of 8 or less, and the battleship scores a hit on a 3. The hit wipes out the damaged U.S. battalion. There is no need to perform the infantry segment, as the only U.S. infantry on the island has been destroyed, so we proceed to the infantry advance step. The 2 Japanese battalions land on the beach unopposed. We return all aircraft next and advance the turn counter. With no U.S. forces left in Borneo, the Japanese take the island and claim victory, ending the battle. The second battle in New Guinea is next, and we start by moving U.S. forces to the battle map. We'll place all our surface ships in the coastal area so they can bombard the Japanese infantry on the island. Our submarine force is irrelevant in this battle, as there are no Japanese ships, so we'll leave them in the ocean area. We move the Japanese forces next and place the infantry in their foxholes. We now roll for the number of combat turns. We roll a 9, which means 4 turns. The Japanese have 3 infantry forces on the map, which means they'll draw 1 battle plan per turn. Finally, we choose our battle plans. We'll purchase ranging shots for our surface ships and envelop and charge for our infantry forces. The setup is complete, and it's now time to do battle. The Japanese draw their battle plan, and it's air combat, which has no effect. We move U.S. aircraft next, and will place all our air forces in the island area to attack the Japanese infantry. There are no Japanese aircraft or ships, so we move directly to combat and the bomb runs segment. And only the 18th Fighter Group manages to score a hit, which damages one of the Japanese battalions. We skip the torpedoes and depth charge segments and perform naval guns. Our surface fleet bombards the island, and our cruiser force scores a hit. We'll play the ranging shots battle plan to add a second hit. The first hit destroys one of the Japanese battalions, and the second hit damages the other. The infantry segment is next. The damaged 55th Infantry fires at U.S. and Aussie forces, but misses on a 9. The Allies fire back, and they also miss. We'll play the envelop battle plan and re-roll for the 1st Australian Infantry, but they miss again on a 7. We proceed to the return aircraft step, since all infantry are already in their foxholes, and we advance the turn counter, beginning our next turn. The Japanese draw a battle plan, and it's kamikaze attack, which has no effect. Our aircraft head back to the island area to attack the Japanese infantry, and we proceed with the bomb runs segment. The 18th Fighter Group scores a hit again, which destroys the last Japanese battalion on the island. We only need one more hit to wipe out all Japanese forces in New Guinea, so let's hope our surface ships can finish the job in the naval gun segment. And our battleship force manages to land the killing blow, scoring one hit. The Japanese 55th Infantry is destroyed, and the island of New Guinea is clear of enemies, ending the battle. U.S. and Australian forces take control in New Guinea, wresting their first objective from the Japanese. But the Japanese are bearing down on the Solomon Islands, with 3 aircraft carriers, several support ships, and infantry. They mean to take these islands, and this battle will be a big one. We move the U.S. forces to the battle map. We place our 3 carriers in the U.S. ocean area, as this is the only area they can be placed. We'll place our 2 destroyer forces and the cruiser force with the highest AAA value in the ocean area as escorts, and place the 2 remaining cruiser forces, which have the highest surface attack values, in the coastal area, along with the transport. We place our land-based aircraft and infantry on the island, and we'll place our submarine force in the Japanese ocean area. Finally, we place U.S. carrier aircraft next to the 3 carriers. This completes the U.S. forces setup. Japanese force placement is next. The Japanese have 3 carriers in this battle, and there are infantry waiting on transports. Per the rules, all Japanese carriers will be placed in the Japanese ocean area. Now, we place escorts for the carriers. The number of escorts must equal the number of aircraft carriers in the battle. The selection process involves 2 simple steps. In step 1, we start by selecting the escort with the lowest surface attack value, which is a choice between the 2 destroyer forces. We place one of them in the ocean area. In step 2, we place an escort with the highest surface attack value in the coastal area, which would be the battleship force. We perform the first step once again, selecting the escort with the lowest surface attack, which is the 2nd destroyer force, placing it in the ocean area. We perform the second step, placing an escort force with the highest surface attack value in the coastal area, which is one of the 2 cruiser forces. We go back to step 1 and place the remaining surface force in the ocean area. We place the 2 transports in the coastal area as well. Finally, we load the Japanese carriers with aircraft. The Japanese force consists of 2 fleet carriers and 1 light carrier. Referring to the campaign sheet, the fleet carriers Akagi and Soryu receive 1 A6M fighter, 1 D3A dive bomber, and 1 B5N torpedo bomber. The light carrier Zuiho receives 1 fighter and 1 dive bomber. This completes the Japanese force setup. We roll for the number of battle turns. It's a 2, which means 1 turn. Now we determine the number of Japanese battle plans. The Japanese have a total of 12 forces, not counting carrier aircraft and transports, so they will draw 3 battle plans. We now get to choose our battle plans. We'll spend our last 2 supply points for 6 more battle points, which gives us 9 total. With only 1 turn to play, we'll focus on battle plans that focus on aircraft, AAA, and surface attacks. Since we already have a Marine force ashore, we'll get the Leatherneck battle plan, which costs no points, stopping 1 hit on the island. We'll purchase Furball, ranging shots, and anti-aircraft. Also, sonar for the extra torpedo attack. We'll spend 2 points for AAA, and our last 3 points for diving attack, which adds an extra hit for a successful bomb attack. With our attack plans in place, we're ready to begin battle. We draw the first Japanese battle plan. And it's a bad one. First light. One of the Japanese carriers launches an attack in the U.S. ocean area. This is equivalent to a surprise attack, in that the U.S. cannot retaliate other than firing anti-aircraft. The second plan is air combat, another dangerous battle plan. This increases the hit values of Japanese dogfight and bomb rolls. The final plan is attack plan, which adds another point to all Japanese attack rolls. It appears that U.S. forces will be taking losses in this short battle. Before we begin moving our forces, we must perform the first light battle plan. One of the Japanese carriers launches a surprise attack on our forces. The carrier with the most aircraft is chosen, which is between the Akagi and Soryu. Akagi launches its aircraft, and we place them in the U.S. ocean area. Before our ships attack with their AAA, we'll discuss the placement of our ships, which is different from our previous battles. We arrange our escort surface ships into one line and our aircraft carriers into another. Each row of ships will fire their anti-aircraft at the Japanese forces. The escorts will fire first, then the aircraft carriers. In this scenario, the number of Japanese aircraft equals the number of ships in each line, so all ships in each line will fire their AAA. If there were only 2 aircraft attacking, then only 2 ships from both lines would be able to fire. Our line of escorts fires first, and will all hit on a roll of 3 or less. Unfortunately, all of them miss. It's up to our aircraft carriers now, and they fire at the Japanese aircraft. And the Enterprise scores a hit, which damages the A6M fighter. We'll play the anti-aircraft battle plan and roll for another AAA attack from the Enterprise. And we succeed on a roll of 3. The hit destroys the damaged Japanese fighter. We'll immediately play the AAA battle plan, which adds a second hit. We'll choose the B-5N torpedo bomber since it has the higher ship attack value. The remaining Japanese bombers now attack the U.S. ships. The Japanese use the air combat and attack plan battle plans, adding a total of +4 to their final attack rolls, along with a +2 superior attack value. Unsurprisingly, both bomber forces score hits. We can apply the 2 hits in a couple of different ways. We could damage 2 of our carriers, but that would also destroy the aircraft on deck. We could apply both hits to 1 of our carriers, which leaves 2 undamaged carriers for our bomb runs attack later in the sequence. We'll make the hard decision to destroy 1 of our carriers, as we need as many aircraft as possible to attack the Japanese carriers. The carrier Saratoga is chosen, since it has the lowest AAA value. We continue the combat sequence and move U.S. aircraft. We'll send everything we have to the Japanese ocean area to attack the Japanese carriers. We'll leave 1 F-4F carrier fighter behind to help defend our remaining carriers. Moving Japanese bombers is next. The remaining Japanese carrier bombers will now fly as a group to one of 3 valid areas to attack: the island, the coastal area, or the U.S. ocean. We roll a die to determine where they are placed. We roll a 2, which is the Japanese ocean. This is not a valid area since the bombers are already there, so we move to the next higher value area, which is the island. Movement of Japanese fighters is next. The 2 remaining fighter forces can only move to an area where there are U.S. or Japanese aircraft. This means the Japanese ocean, where the bulk of our aircraft are, the island, where Japanese bombers are located, or the U.S. ocean, where we have an F-4F fighter. We roll for the area. It's an 8, and the Japanese fighters are moved to the U.S. ocean. We begin the combat step by performing dogfights. The 2 Japanese fighters and the F-4F fighter will engage in a dogfight. Adding the 2 Japanese battle plans, we add a +4 to the final attack value, which guarantees the 2 A6Ms will hit on any dice roll. We'll roll for all combatants regardless, and hope the F-4F can at least get 1 hit. And both sides score hits. The F-4Fs damage one of the A6Ms. But the 2 Japanese fighters wipe out the lone U.S. aircraft defending the fleet. We could play the furball battle plan here, but there's little point in this scenario. No dogfights will take place in the Japanese ocean area, as there are no defending fighters here. So we perform the AAA segment next. The escorts and aircraft carriers are formed into lines and will both fire at the U.S. aircraft. The attack plan battle plan is in effect, so we add +1 to the attack rolls. The escorts fire first, and the Japanese cruiser force scores a hit. We roll for the aircraft carriers next, and the 2 fleet carriers score hits for a final total of 3 hits. We apply the 3 hits to the U.S. aircraft, starting with the lowest values. We'll apply 2 hits to the F-4F fighter, which destroys it, and a 3rd hit to one of the land-based bombers. The bomb runs segment is next. The Japanese carrier bombers attack U.S. infantry on the island. We add +4 to the attack rolls thanks to the air combat and attack plan battle plans, plus a superior value of 2. The Japanese forces dive in for the attack, and the attack is devastatingly effective. 2 bombers score 2 hits apiece, with the 3rd scoring 1. The 5 hits can be applied to infantry and the airfield. First, we'll play the Leathernecks battle plan, which stops 1 of the hits. We distribute the remaining 4 hits to the lowest value targets. We apply 1 hit to the damaged FFE infantry, destroying it. We apply the remaining 3 hits to the airfield, knocking it down to a value of 1. Now the U.S. bombers make their attack on the Japanese carrier force. The 49th Fighter Group attacks first and misses. The Marine Air Group attacks next and barely misses on a 5. The 2 B-17 groups attack, and both groups miss. Now it's up to our carrier aircraft. The 4 SBD groups dive on the carriers, and the bombers score 3 hits. The TBD torpedo bombers attack next, but both groups miss. We'll play the diving attack battle plan to apply a 4th hit. We apply 2 hits to the Akagi, which destroys it, and the 3rd and 4th hits to the Soryu, which also destroys the carrier. The torpedo segment is next, and our submarine attacks the remaining Japanese ships and misses on a 5. We play the sonar battle plan and re-roll the submarine attack, but we miss again on a 9. Depth charges are next, and one of the Japanese escorts attacks our submarine. All Japanese ships in the ocean area have an attack value of 1, so it matters little who will attack. We'll let Destroyer Group 7 get the glory. And the glory is theirs, as they hit on a 1. The naval gun segment is next. The attack plan battle plan will add +1 to the Japanese attack rolls. The Japanese surface ships fire, and the battleships land a hit. The U.S. surface forces fire next, and both cruiser forces score hits. We'll play the ranging shots battle plan and add a 3rd hit. We apply the 3 hits to the Japanese surface forces. 2 hits destroy the cruiser force, and the 3rd hit damages the battleship force. The lone Japanese hit is applied to the U.S. airfield, which destroys it. The infantry segment is next, but is skipped since the Marines are the only infantry ashore. So we perform the infantry advance step. 4 Japanese battalions land on the beaches, with the U.S. forces landing a single battalion. We now return aircraft. Japanese aircraft return to the ocean area to land on their carriers, but the light carrier Zuiho is the only carrier remaining. Zuiho can only carry a total of 2 aircraft, a fighter and dive bomber. The remaining carrier aircraft, therefore, cannot land and are forced to ditch in the ocean. U.S. aircraft return with all the remaining carrier aircraft landing safely. The land-based aircraft have no such luck, as the U.S. airfield has been wiped out. Therefore, all U.S. land-based aircraft are destroyed, a heavy blow to U.S. air power in the Solomons. This ends the inflict airfield losses segment, and we advance the turn counter, ending the battle. We move the remaining forces back to the campaign map. We return to the sequence of play and the Japanese reinforce step. Referring to the bottom of the chart, we add +1 per resupply order, which, right now, is sitting at 10. However, we apply a -1 modifier to all damaged Japanese forces on the campaign map. As shown in the last video, in the Yamamoto expansion, when moving any damaged Japanese ships back to their fleet card, we flip them to their repaired side and adjust the resupply counter back 1 space. The battleship Fuso Yamashiro was damaged, so we flip it to the full strength side and reduce the resupply counter 1 space. Borneo also has a damaged battalion, so we reduce the counter another space. The final placement is 8, so we add 8 to the final dice roll. We roll a 2, which is increased to 10. Japan draws 2 ships, 2 infantry, and 1 land-based aircraft as reinforcements. A fleet carrier and an escort carrier are revealed, along with a battalion and the 20th Infantry. For aircraft, the Misawa Kokutai is activated. The 2 new aircraft carriers are placed on the Carrier Fleet No. 4 fleet card, as this fleet has 2 carrier spaces to fill. The remaining forces are placed in Japan. Japanese repair is next. The damaged battalion in Borneo is flipped to its full strength side and moved to the bottom of the reinforcement pool to be drawn at a later time. The U.S. return their naval forces to port. We move all ships currently in the return to port box to Hawaii. And all naval forces used this turn are placed in the 1942-45 box. The U.S. supply check is next. Looking at the map, all areas where U.S. forces are located are still in supply, so no adjustments need to be made. And finally, it's the U.S. defeat check. We still have 6 objectives under U.S. control, which places us in the historical range, which means we are still a fleet commander. With that, we've reached the end of the campaign turn. Some decisive battles were fought these past 2 months. Borneo was overrun by the Japanese, and the U.S. lost a battalion in the battle. But in New Guinea, the tables were turned. U.S. forces defeated the Japanese infantry forces and took control of the island. This was significant, since New Guinea is one of the campaign objectives, the first one that was successfully taken from the Japanese. But the battle in the Solomons was the most vicious of all. In the campaign's first carrier versus carrier battle, the Saratoga was lost to an early surprise attack, thanks to the help of some very effective battle plans. All U.S. land-based aircraft were also destroyed, another big blow. U.S. Marines hung on long enough to allow a small U.S. battalion to land, but they'll be forced to contend with 4 Japanese battalions that also came ashore. But U.S. Navy carrier bombers sank 2 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi and Soryu, and a cruiser force was destroyed by U.S. surface ships. The Japanese replaced their carrier losses, but fortunately the U.S. only suffered 1 naval loss, with other forces suffering damage, which can be repaired. The U.S. still has a presence in the Solomons, but barely so. It's not a stretch to predict that the next 2 months will see more carrier battles fought in the Pacific. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video of Fleet Commander Nimitz.